All right, let's get into it. You've probably heard of them, right? They've been called, well, a lot of things. A force for good, a gang of cyber terrorists, a global political movement, and sometimes just a bunch of kids messing around in their parents' basement. Today, we are decoding the story of Anonymous. Some of its own members have called the group the final boss of the internet. And you know what? It's a pretty bold claim. Sounds like it's pulled straight out of a video game. But for a while there, they really were exactly that. This chaotic, incredibly powerful, and totally unpredictable force that could take on pretty much anyone. To their supporters, this isn't about pranks at all. They see Anonymous as the digital version of a protest, a modern-day legion, using the internet as a weapon to defend free speech and, hold the powerful accountable. But on the flip side, you talk to their targets, organizations like the Church of Scientology or even the FBI, and they'll tell you a completely different story. To them, Anonymous is nothing more than a cyber terrorist group, just hooligans causing millions in damages, stealing private info, and generally making life miserable for people, all for their own amusement. And then there's a third way to look at it, that they're just kids, pranksters pulling off some pretty wild stunts just to get a cheap laugh, with no real ideology behind it, other than pure chaos and a bit of nihilism. So, which one is it? Are they heroes, villains, or just trolls with too much time on their hands? Well, the answer is, it's complicated. To really understand Anonymous, you have to go right back to the beginning, to its birthplace, which was basically the chaotic beating heart of the old internet. See, Anonymous wasn't born out of some grand political manifesto. Nope. It kind of grew, almost like a strange mold in a petri dish, from the anonymous, anything-goes culture of one of the internet's most, let's say, infamous corners. And that place was 4chan, specifically a board known simply as B. I want you to picture a place with absolutely no rules, no memory, threads just vanish when they're inactive, and no real identity. Everyone posts as anonymous. It was this wild breeding ground for memes, really dark humor, and a very, very specific kind of online behavior. And that behavior was trolling. The whole goal wasn't to debate or to convince anyone of anything. It was all about provoking a reaction. The bigger, the angrier, the more emotional a response you could get out of someone, the better. All for the fun of it, or what they called the lulz, which is just a corruption of LOL. And this quote, man, it just perfectly captures that whole philosophy. There was this early, almost nihilistic spirit that if you were someone who took the internet seriously, you immediately became a target. It was like a troll's sworn duty to completely disrupt your world. So the first real test of this collective power happened back in 2006 with a so-called raid on a kids' online game called Habbo Hotel. Thousands of users, all using the exact same avatar, swarmed the game and formed basically a human wall to block access to the game's virtual pool, just spamming the phrase, "pool's closed." It was completely pointless, totally absurd, and it was a landmark moment. They figured out that their numbers, even when they were all anonymous, could be a serious disruptive force. For a while, that's pretty much all it was. Chaotic, silly pranks. But in 2008, a simple online joke slammed headfirst into a very powerful real-world organization. And just like that, Anonymous accidentally stumbled into its first real cause, the fight against censorship. It all kicked off when this internal Scientology training video of Tom Cruise got leaked and naturally was mocked everywhere. The Church of Scientology fought back, and they fought back hard, issuing all these legal takedown notices. But here's the thing, in trying to bury the video, they made it explode in popularity. It's a classic example of the Streisand effect. And to the culture of 4chan, this was basically a declaration of war. You do not censor their internet. What started as online jokes very quickly escalated into a full-blown global protest movement. So one of the key weapons in their digital arsenal became the DDoS attack. Now, this isn't hacking like you see in the movies. It's not super sophisticated. Really, it's just brute force. You're using a massive network of computers to flood a website with so much traffic that its servers just give up and the whole thing collapses. Here's a great way to think about it. A DDoS attack isn't like breaking into a house to steal something valuable. It's way more like hiring 1,000 people to just stand in line at a bus station so that nobody who actually needs to catch a bus can get on. You're creating this giant digital traffic jam. It's basically a protest by blockade. That whole battle with Scientology changed everything.
Anonymous suddenly realized that their collective power could be aimed at way bigger targets than online games or controversial churches. They were ready to take on governments, and this was the birth of their global hacktivism. By 2010, they were a serious geopolitical force. I mean, when PayPal, Visa, and MasterCard all decided to block donations to WikiLeaks, Anonymous launched what they called Operation Payback and just systematically took down their websites in protest. Then, a year later, during the Arab Spring, when the Egyptian government shut down the internet to silence protesters, Anonymous and other activists scrambled to get citizens back online, providing everything from old-school dial-up connections to encryption tools. But here's the thing. As Anonymous got more powerful and way more famous, two things started to happen. Law enforcement began to close in, and the group itself began to break apart. That chaotic, leaderless structure that was its greatest strength, well, it was also becoming its greatest weakness. A perfect example of this was a splinter group called LulzSec. Now, these guys were some of the most skilled hackers from the Anonymous Collective, but they completely rejected the whole political motivation thing. For them, it was all about the lulz. They hacked randomly, chaotically, media companies, government sites, literally anyone, just to prove that they could. And that created this deep, ideological rift in the movement. And then came the crackdown. The whole idea of being anonymous offered a shield, sure, but it wasn't a perfect one. The FBI started hunting down members, and in one single day, they arrested 16 people for those PayPal attacks, sending a very clear message that your digital actions have very, very real-world consequences. So, after the rise and the fall, the splinter groups and the arrests, what is the legacy of Anonymous? Well, it's about as messy and contradictory as the group itself. For Brian, one of the guys arrested in the Scientology attacks, the stakes became brutally real. He was just a regular person who clicked a button as part of a protest, and for that, he got a year in prison and was literally banned from touching a computer. The price of his digital activism was immense. You know, maybe the best way to understand Anonymous is to stop trying to define it as just one thing. It's more like a kaleidoscope. Depending on your perspective, how you turn it, when you're looking, you'll see a political movement, or a gang of pranksters, a force for good, or a force for pure chaos. It's all of those things and none of them, all at the same time. And that leaves us with a really fundamental question for our digital age. Is a DDoS attack the modern equivalent of a sit-in at a lunch counter, a digital blockade meant to disrupt business as usual? Or is it just simple vandalism, a crime that silences other people? The law says one thing, but activists argue something else entirely. Ultimately, their whole story forces us to ask a big question. How do we want to handle power and protest on the internet? Was Anonymous a necessary, chaotic agent of change in a world that desperately needed to be shaken up? Or were they a dangerous menace that showed us just how easily digital mobs can form? A menace or a benefit? The debate is definitely far from over.